Hello, I'm going to be teaching you how to paint today. Yay! Let's go ahead and do the apple painting. So first we are going to need brown, yellow, red, white, and a little green. So if you've got all those colors, get them out. I'm going to use one of my favorite brushes, the flat ones that are about half the width of my finger. And for the background, if you have just a larger brush to make that easier. I've got a few different sizes here. I'm not sure which one I'm going to use. Probably this one. I like that. So we've got two brushes, a small one and a big one. That's probably good. I've got a palette. I keep it in a Ziploc bag sometimes if I'm going to paint soon so the paints don't dry out. And a cup of water and paper towels as usual. So let's get started. I'm going to get some white. Actually, I'm going to see. I still have some white on my canvas right here. I'm going to use that for the background, and I'm going to get a little bit of brown. Here's a good brown. It's called burnt umber. My favorite brown was called, it's also called burnt umber. I like the Basics brand. You can see I've used up most of this. Somebody gave me these for Christmas, so I've been using them up. I don't like to waste paints. So I'm going to put a little bit of brown on my palette. How about right there? And we're going to start with the back, just the background for now. So let's mix a little bit of water, mix the white, put a little brown in it, just a little bit of brown, probably a little more than that. Just mix it until you've got a nice light background, and the background I used before had a little bit of yellow in it. So I'm going to take some yellow that I had already sitting there, and I think that gives it a nice warm background. And then I'm going to just get some water. Oops, that's a lot of water. That's going to spread really well. So let's just start spreading this across the canvas. You can see I've got a couple of streaks of brown and yellow in there. And I actually don't mind that for this background because I wanted it to look like it's sitting on wood. And you know how wood has all colors of streaks in it. So you just get a little water if your paintbrush gets dry. Get a little more of that paint. I've got so much water, you can see some bubbles on there. So I'm just going to go over it with this larger brush until it gets smooth. I'm going to mix a little bit more brown and make it a little bit darker. I forgot to mention that I have an 8x10 canvas. But you probably already figured that out by now. I'm not really going to paint the middle because I'm going to paint the apple there. You can go over the whole thing if you want. You just have to let it dry a little bit before you paint the apple on. Let's go ahead and just do the whole thing. And that's just a thin wash of color. I think that looks pretty nice. It's a light colored table. Now if you paint like just any old way, you can see that you leave streaks in there because this paint is so wet. So I've been going straight across, and that gives it a much smoother look. If you go straight off the side, then you don't leave your jagged lines there. And also my brush is kind of on the side. I'm not going straight perpendicular like that. I'm stroking it on the side like that. That gives it a smoother look too. Well, I think we're done with that. Now I'm going to draw the apple shape. And I picked an apple. I painted this one from real life. So I picked an apple that was kind of oval. You can see it's not a full circle. So we're going to paint just in the middle a good sized oval shape. And the red goes up to the edges in most of this apple. I have a little bit of a reflective light on this side. I love reflective light because I feel like that really just pops the apple and like it feels more 3D. There's a little reflective light here. That's where on the shadow side, you have some of the light coming from a different source and you just get a little bit of a shine on the edge. And I feel like that just really makes it look, you know, 3D. So we're gonna try to keep a little light color on these two edges, but the top side actually ended up being really dark and the right side is pretty red. So I'm gonna use just maybe a red color and we can start painting the red portions in. That's actually how I did it. Now I'm done with this large brush for now, so I'm just gonna clean it off and then use my paper towels to dry it. It's easier to clean your brushes right away. I have lost a lot of brushes by not cleaning them properly, so don't do that. So then we set that aside, and then you get your favorite smaller brush. I'm gonna go with this one. And we are going to get some red. I'm gonna go with crimson. I'm gonna go ahead and squirt some more of the yellow. How about we go with this brilliant yellow. This is just basic yellow, a really bright yellow. Yellow is the one color that you need extra. You don't want to water it down. It's very translucent, so if you paint over something, it's hard to really get the yellow to come back. So if you wanted to paint yellow like in a spot you've already painted brown or red, you would actually want to maybe cover it with white first and then paint the yellow over the white, because the yellow just, you have to get so many layers of yellow to make it that really bright yellow that you're looking for. So let's see. It's still pretty wet. Let's pause for a minute and let that dry. Okay, I only paused for like a minute while that dried. So we're gonna start with the red. So get a little red. My paintbrush is dry right now, but just get a little red. We're gonna start at the top. I'm gonna leave a couple of inches so you have some nice room around the apple, and just start somewhere up there. Then come around, make a nice oval shape. And then our apple kind of went down this way and up around this way. You can see I have very little paint on here right now because I'm just trying to decide where I want my apple to sit. I don't really want to like douse the painting. I actually feel like I want the apple to be a little lower. So I'm going to come in here and give it maybe somewhere around there and just give it a little bit of a shape. we'll just leave the apple kind of centered in this painting. So after you get a nice sized oval that you want your apple to be, then we can start painting in. Now on the top, you've got a little smudge of red around the top, so I'm going to start with that. So just a little bit more red, and just start kind of painting into the apple like that. I always come back and fix up my edges later, so I'm not super worried about the edges looking bad. Down here, I'm going to paint, just start swiping these up. I'm going to go around the bottom, most of the way around the bottom, and just make it red. Oops, I'm going out. And then this side was mostly red, so I'm going to go down and just give it a little extra red. Now when you're painting fruit and things like apples, you just basically paint what you see. So instead of painting like in your head what you think an apple looks like just like kind of squint your eyes and see like where's the red really popping out. Like that's where I'm going to put the red. Okay, I'm going to go in and paint some of that yellow because we were talking about, to clean the red off your brush, we were talking about how if I smudge the red up into where I want the yellow, it's going to be hard to make that as yellow as we want. So take your yellow now and get a lot. You can fill up your brush with yellow. And we're just going to paint this whole top portion, probably about halfway down your oval, let's say about there. And just paint this whole top portion yellow. Because that part of the apple was really, really bright. So just get a lot, smear it around. It looks like the yellow kind of came down this way. You've got some parts that went down this way. Now you can see that I'm leaving a little space between my red and yellow because I don't want my brush to end up getting mixed up with red and yellow and end up looking orange right now. I'm going to blend it in just a minute. Now remember we pointed out this highlight on the side. Right now I'm going to go ahead and put that on. So just down the edge, this apple had a nice shine like that. And then I'm going to go ahead and just paint some of the yellow around the edge, paint it up there. I've got the yellow, oops, let's just cover up this section. You can hear my son is running around upstairs. Oh my. Okay, so I'm going to start blending it in. So I'm just going to push it kind of the way the streaks were going. So here the streaks were going kind of vertical up and down. So I'm going to blend this in. And it doesn't have to be perfect, but I like it to look a little bit smoother. Right here the streaks were going kind of this way. And acrylic paint dries really fast, so it's always difficult to really get a nice smooth blend like you would get with oil paints. Like right here you can tell my acrylic is already drying. When I paint without talking, I usually paint a lot faster. I'm gonna get some more yellow and just blend it up there. So My canvas is covered really nice. It looks like there was some yellow on the bottom here. I might just plop a little bit extra down there. Just a little bit. We'll see what I do with that later. Okay, now I'm going to get some more red. Actually, maybe we should start with this brown shadow on the side. So I'm not even going to bother washing the yellow off because you won't see the yellow through the brown anyway. So get a little brown, maybe a little water so it spreads smoother, just a little bit. And just get some of that brown on your paintbrush. And it looks like on the top side, we had some brown up there. So all the way up to the edge, there was some brown. And I'm gonna try to blend it out a little bit. And it looks like, sometimes I flip my brush over because I have brown on both sides, so I've got a little extra there. But I want a little bit of brown to just keep going around the top. And I put a couple of streaks just coming down. And now we're going to paint this shadow. So you can see it doesn't go up to the edge. We left the highlight and it just comes around the side, kind of like a crescent shape. So I'm going to get a little more brown and I'm going to just start doing some streaky patterns here. And an apple's curved, we all know that. So I'm doing kind of curved brush strokes because I want this paint to look like it goes around the apple. I don't want to take all that yellow away from the side. And that shadow goes all the way up around to the top. Get a little bit more brown on there and just keep coming down around here. Somewhere around here is where it fades more into red. I'm going to get some more red. I'm going to wash that brown off and get my nice bright red color. And I watered it down a lot before, so you can see it's a little translucent. So I'm going to paint some pretty heavy red on here. And we can even go over the brown a little bit. I want some of this red to kind of streak around the brown. And you can mix the red and the brown. I'm going to smooth out that side a little bit. And I'm going to go over most of the red sections again so I can just make it a little bit stronger. A little bit of water if you feel like your brush is drying out. Some more red. I'm going to make these red parts really pop. It looks kind of like fire. I think that's cool. And remember your apple is curved, so I do a lot of curved lines around the side. My brush is getting dry, so get a little more water. Just a little bit of red. I'm not really filling up my brush with red, just a little bit. Now I want to paint this top portion a lot stronger. I wanted to give it a nice line on the edge. Red is very translucent too. You can tell where the brown has dried, you can see through it. So I'm going to streak some of that red down, blend it in pretty good. And I think that's looking okay. I'm going to go around the edges with a drier brush. I almost ran out of red paint, so my brush is pretty dry. And I'm just going to work on blending it where I feel like it needs a little bit extra blending. Now this side here still doesn't feel dark enough to me. I'm going to go in with some more brown and just give it a little bit extra. I want that shadow to really pop. And I'm going to take a little bit of brown and just do a little streak of a shadow over here. Not even all the way up to the edge. Just enough to give it a hint of a shadow. And I'm going to darken up this edge a little bit with my brown too. Now, that's not too bad. I think we're going to go in and put the green in. So, clean off your brush. I'm going to have to get some green out. I have a light green. It's called sap green. That's the one I'm going to use. And just a tiny bit, because we're only doing right around the stem area with green. Probably most greens would work. If you have a really dark green, you can just mix a little white into it. So I'm going to take a little bit of it on my dry brush, just a tiny bit, and we're going to start. Let's see, the stem is not in the middle. If you cut your apple in half, it's about halfway up. So it's like a quarter of the way from the top and a little off to the side. So I'm going to say right about there is where I'm going to put it. And then from here, the real apple that I painted just had streaks of green coming out. So just kind of like a sunburst of green coming out of it. And you can do some big streaks and some small streaks. And then over here, just do a couple of, oops, my paintbrush is drying out. Get a little bit extra and just do a couple of streaks across the front of the apple. I got some thicker streaks, some thinner streaks. I'm going to take a few out to here and just curve those a little, give the apple kind of a round shape. And if you want, you can get a little yellow to help blend it. That's working pretty nicely. I'm going to wash my brush off, get a little bit of yellow and just help blend those green streaks out a little bit. I like the look of oil paints. I like when it's really smooth. And that's one thing that I'm not so fond of with acrylics, is it's just a lot harder to get that smooth look. The acrylics pick up the texture of the canvas a lot. And I know some of that can be solved by buying more expensive canvases that have smoother textures to them. So we've got just kind of a green sunburst coming out of the middle there. And let's see, I want to do a little bit of orange. So I'm going to take some of the yellow, mix it with just a pinch of red. You have to mix that pretty good. So it makes kind of a peachy color. I'm just going to put some of that color streaks right between the red and the yellow. It's not really going to cover up the red at all, but I think that makes it look a little bit smoother. Oops. Okay, then I'm going to wash my brush off. And I want a little bit of brown, probably just on the corner. Just a little bit. We're going to draw the stem in. And I made kind of like a smile where the stem sits right in the middle of our green sunburst. And then I took a little bit extra and just did a little curved stem that came out of that area. And maybe I'll make it a little thicker. Now here's one of my favorite parts about painting, is you get to put the highlights on. So I'm taking a little bit of white. I had white somewhere, but I think I mixed it all up with my brown. So I'm getting a little extra white. Now I'm gonna get just a little bit, and you can see the highlights here. I've got a pretty good sized dot there and there, a little bit around the top. And then I did some wispier highlights where I mixed the white with some water. So we're gonna start with just dabbing on some of these bright highlights. So I'm gonna put a nice chunk of white right here. Then put maybe just some white over there. I'm going to give a little bit of white right there. And maybe just a tiny bit of white on the stem. There we go. I'm going to dry my brush off and try to blend that out a little bit. That looks good. Now I'm going to mix some water with some of our white and make it a little bit thinner. And then my brush is really wet. I'm just going to dab it, take some of that water off, and then give some of those wispier highlights. Just a little bit. I've got a lot of white on my brush now, but just a little bit around the edge. And I had a little bit up here. And I'm going to add a little more there. It looks like around the bottom even, I had a little bit there. Now I'm going to completely wipe my brush off and try to just blend that in a little bit. So around the edges, you can just wiggle your brush around and get some of that blended in a little bit better. If you move it around too much, you actually just lose your highlight. So I'm just going around the edges and trying to get that a little bit smoother just with these wispy ones. I kind of like these big ones to have the harsh edges. And I'm going to go in with a little bit of brown and do our shadow. So this apple has a shadow along the bottom, a thin shadow, and then up around the side, it's more of an oval shape. So I'm just going to draw it in. I need a little shadow, and it doesn't go all the way to the side of the apple. It comes up somewhere at the bottom of the apple. Then this is where you need to be very careful And maybe have a little water so your paint runs smoother. I often hold my breath when I'm doing a line like this, I noticed. But just very carefully, very gently, you get the shadow all the way up to the edge of the apple. And then we're going to go up, kind of up at an angle, and the shadow came out the top. I don't want to take it all the way to the edge, so I'm just going to stop my shadow right there. And because this dries so fast, I'm going to blend the edges before I finish painting that in. So I'm just going to go around and kind of smudge these edges up because a shadow doesn't have a super harsh edge. And I like to smudge the farther out portion more because the shadow gets softer the farther away it goes. The shadow will be stronger at the bottom here. And you've noticed if a shadow is close to you, it has a stronger color, but if the shadow goes farther away from you, then it gets fainter. So that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to fill in my shadow. And the shadow should get darker and darker. So I'm going to keep smudging this out a little bit to keep the shadow smooth, but as it gets closer, it gets darker. So I'm going to try to keep the paint a little heavier. And my trick when I'm painting some of these lines is to turn my canvas upside down, because it's easier for me to paint some lines this way. I'm going to get a little water. I want this to spread pretty well. I'm going to need some more paint up there. Then I'm going to flip it back around and just touch it up a little bit. My paintbrush is too wet. I'm going to dry that off. I had a lot of paint on it still. A drier brush is a lot easier to blend, so you're not adding more paint to it. You just want to smudge the paint out a little bit. And I think that looks like a pretty good shadow. And I almost forgot, I actually put some little brown dots, like little freckles in there, because this apple was a little spotted. So let's take our thinned out brown and give this apple a little bit of texture. And just give him some little texture spots, or we could call them freckles, up in this yellow area. Just around the highlights. Let me give it a little bit. Whoops, there's some big freckles. And I actually, looks like when I was painting this before, I put some kind of strong red streaks in there. So I'm going to get just a little bit extra red, and maybe just put a couple of like red freckles over here. This apple I painted had a lot of texture to it. It had all the colors. I'm just giving it some pretty good sized red dots actually. And if you like your apple to look really smooth, you don't have to do this. I thought it gave it a little more character. Just be careful not to go over your highlighted parts. I still think my red is drying a little bit faint. I'm going to go ahead and just make some of these red portions a little stronger. I like the red to really be in your face. I like you to know that it's red. And I did not fix my side over here. It's all wiggly. So I'm going to use this red and just try to smooth out that side a little bit. I don't like having crazy edges on my apple. And right there, the paint looks a little thin. I'm going to give it a little extra red. So it's really just the look that you want for your apple. Since we're not painting from a real apple, I'm painting from an apple painting. Well, there you have it. It looks similar. Of course, the painting's never going to turn out exactly the same. So we've got a lighter wood background than I did before, but that's something I actually wanted. This color got a little too dark on the original one. So I like this lighter look. And our stem looks a little bit smaller. It's about the same size as this much smaller apple. So you could have painted probably a bigger stem than I did. But there you go. That's a pretty good sized apple. Let's zoom in and see it. I actually think it looks kind of like a tomato. So there's the original. And there's the new one from today. I like them both. I'm happy with that. So definitely share your apples on social media somewhere and tag me as Emmalee Designs or Emmalee or whatever you want. But let me see your apples after you painted them. Also, subscribe to my channel. I don't know where the button's gonna be. I think it's over that way. Subscribe and like and share and all that. And happy painting.